Adolf Hitler is at the height of his power. He's steamrolled through Europe. France has fallen. Britain is on the ropes. For millions of Germans, he's the greatest military and strategic genius of all time. The Nazi propaganda machine is running at full speed, feeding the public this illusion that Germany is unstoppable, that Hitler can do no wrong. But behind closed doors, that illusion is starting to crack. Beneath the victories, Hitler is making critical errors. His unchecked ego, ideological obsessions, and refusal to listen to reason will soon set in motion a series of failures. This is the story of how the man who claimed he would rule for 1,000 years starts to lose control, and how decisions made at the height of his power would ultimately bring it all crashing down. Welcome to Peak Visibility, where today we're pulling back the curtain on the man who thought he could conquer the world, but instead steered it straight into chaos.
Doesn't assume that he was either an imbecile or a madman. No, what he was something different. And it was the reason that he lost the war. He was an indefatigable, unregenerative Nazi. Thank you very much indeed.
Because despite everything, the parades, the speeches, the victories, Hitler makes a decision so reckless that it turns the tide of the entire war. It wasn't a secret weapon, it wasn't a spy, it was his own overconfidence. And it all started with one fatal miscalculation: invading the Soviet Union. In the summer of 1941, Hitler made a huge mistake. He invaded the Soviet Union with the biggest army ever, more than 3 million German troops and thousands of tanks. But Hitler wasn't just confident, he ultimately knew victory would come swiftly. He believed that the Soviet Union would collapse within weeks, just as France had. He dismissed Soviet forces as weak, disorganized, and inferior. But he couldn't have been more wrong. At first, the plan seemed to work. German forces advanced rapidly, capturing huge parts of Soviet territory. It looked like another success story. But then the problems began. The distances to the Soviet Union were enormous. Supply lines stretched thin, roads turned to mud, and the Soviets, unlike France or Poland, refused to collapse. Stalin poured millions of troops into the fight, and despite losses, they kept coming. By winter, the Germans were not only exhausted, they were unprepared. Hitler had expected victory before the snow fell, so troops had no winter gear or no cold weather equipment. Temperatures dropped, engines froze, and frostbite took more soldiers than bullets.
И эти люди, лишенные совести и чести, люди с моралью животных, имеют наглость призывать к уничтожению великой русской нации. Немецкие захватчики хотят иметь истребительную войну с народом СССР. Что же, если немцы хотят иметь истребительную войну, они ее получат.
Still, Hitler refused to retreat. So, what was supposed to be a quick victory turned into exactly the kind of fight Germany was not built to win, and the cost, unthinkable. The myth of Hitler's genius started to fracture. For the first time, the German people began to ask, could he actually lose this war? But the worst was still to come. If attacking the Soviet Union was the beginning of Hitler's unraveling, Stalingrad was when people realized Germany wasn't unbeatable. Despite the loss, Hitler remained obsessed with defeating the Soviet Union. Instead of learning from the failure of his last war, he doubled down. This time he aimed for a city called Stalingrad, which was important because it had the name of his enemy, Stalin. Hitler thought taking the city would hurt the Soviets, but Hitler once again underestimated his enemy and overestimated himself. The battle for Stalingrad quickly devolved into one of the bloodiest and most horrific urban battles in history. Street by street, room by room, soldiers fought in freezing rubble for months. By November, over 250,000 German troops were trapped inside the city with no way out. Supplies had to be flown in, but it never showed up. Troops starved, froze, and died where they stood. Hitler, refusing to allow a retreat, ordered the Sixth Army to hold their ground, insisting that reinforcements would arrive. They never did.
The 5th of December, we had to give to our corps a message which, at least in my divisions, never had been given during all the war. We are no further able to attack. This is the end. And that was the 5th. And the morning of the 6th began the counterattack of the Russians. All over the front, not only against us.
In February 1943, the inevitable happened. The trapped German army finally surrendered, which was the first German field marshal in history to do so. Only 90,000 survivors were taken prisoner. Fewer than 6,000 would ever return home. The defeat at Stalingrad wasn't just a military disaster, it was a psychological earthquake. Hitler's aura of infallibility was gone. For the first time, many Germans began to realize their leader wasn't leading them to glory, he was leading them to destruction. But Hitler wasn't done making catastrophic decisions, not by a long shot. Just 4 days after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, Hitler made one of the worst decisions of the entire war. He declared war on the United States. No one forced him to. Japan hadn't asked him to do it. The US had declared war on Japan, not Germany. But Hitler, driven by overconfidence and a deep hatred for America, believed the US would be slow to fight back, and the war would be over before America could make a difference. He was very wrong. By joining the war, the US brought something Hitler couldn't beat: huge factories that made tanks, planes, ships, and weapons faster than Germany ever could. Hitler was already fighting a tough war against the Soviet Union in the East. Now he had a second global superpower to contend with. Even worse for Hitler, his decision made the countries fighting against him stronger. The US, Britain, and the Soviet Union worked together with one goal: to defeat Nazi Germany. From then on, Hitler was fighting a war he could not win, against enemies that kept getting stronger. And he still had more bad decisions ahead. As the war dragged on, Hitler's leadership style took a dark and disastrous turn. Once content to let his generals handle battlefield decisions, he gradually transformed into an obsessive micromanager, one who refused to listen, admit fault, or trust even his most experienced commanders. After early victories, Hitler convinced himself that his military instincts were superior to those of his general staff. Success, he believed, came from his personal genius, not from professional strategy. As setbacks mounted, instead of adapting, he doubled down on control.
I was not a big man, I was not very important. For some reasons, then I came free. But not without condition. I was sent to the front line. It was to be reported about me every 4 weeks for 6 months. And if I was not, let me say, a good soldier on the front line, then it was written that I was graded down to private from colonel.
He routinely overruled tactical retreats, demanded last stands, and moved divisions on maps without regard for terrain or logistics. Generals who questioned him were dismissed, sidelined, or forced into loyalty. Some, like Erwin Rommel, would later be accused of treason or driven to suicide. What could have been strategic withdrawals or tactical regroupings instead turned into unnecessary bloodbaths. Hitler's growing paranoia isolated him from reality, and his obsession with absolute control crippled Germany's military flexibility. By the war's final years, Hitler wasn't leading the war, he was dragging it down with him. Hitler's strong belief in Nazi ideas was not only very wrong, but also hurt Germany's chances of winning the war. Even as Germany's military situation got worse, Hitler focused more on his plan to hurt and kill millions of people he didn't like, instead of helping his soldiers. He sent trains full of people to places where they were killed, using the same tracks that should have been used to bring food and supplies to his army. Hitler's racist policies also backfired. Instead of helping Germany, many fought back in secret, making soldiers stay and fight smaller battles instead of the main war. Hitler's hatred also scared away countries that might have helped him. He was so focused on his racist ideas that he missed chances to make friends or make smarter plans. In simple words, Hitler's hate made him forget what really mattered to win the war. He fought a war inside the war, a war against people because of who they were. This wasted Germany's resources, caused arguments among leaders, and helped make sure Germany would lose. Hitler rose to power quickly, but he also failed quickly. At first, he won battles, but those wins hid the truth. He made bad choices, believed in hateful ideas, and didn't listen to advice. His plan to invade the Soviet Union didn't work. His army lost badly at Stalingrad. When he declared war on the United States, he added another powerful enemy. He also took too much control from his generals, which led to more mistakes in battle. Worst of all, Hitler focused more on his hateful beliefs than on winning the war. This wasted supplies and made more people fight against him. In the end, Hitler's choices didn't just lose him the war, they caused the deaths of millions of people. His story is a reminder of what can happen when one person has too much power and uses it with hate and pride instead of reason and care.